Hi, this is Sarah. This is my presentation, Money Matters, Budgeting and Managing Fiscal Resources in Nursing. This is for our class, Nursing 420, Leadership and Management in Nursing. So first, since this presentation is on budgeting, what is a budget? I think that all of us understand a little bit about budgeting from the first time that we would get an allowance and we would be told that we have to spend money on a certain thing or be contributing to something that we need to buy versus something that we might like to spend some money on. In my case, I had to contribute a little bit to some school supplies, but then I wanted to have enough money to be able to buy something I wanted, like a soft pretzel at the mall. So budgeting is making sure we have enough money for the things that we need, but still having some money left over for the things that we want. And this is true even on a nursing unit. So what factors contribute to a budget? I really like this graphic because it shows that in budgeting you need to balance your income and your expenses. And again, a nursing unit is no different. It's a plan for the fiscal year, and you're kind of making a guess on how you think the year will go. And there are many factors that managers need to take into account. First would be the people, and these are not the staff. Those would be the people that we serve, the community, the demographics of the community we serve. And as we know from the next person there, competitors, one of our competitors recently closed, and that really changed the community that we serve. And as a result, like for example, our ED is really having to expand. Next, we might factor in the money. Where does the money come from? From insurance, from Medicare. In our case, we have a lot of self-pay in our plain community, so that's where our money comes from. The numbers. How long do patients usually stay? How sick are they? How many procedures or visits are each patient going to need? So like on 7 East, the acuity of our patients may not be very high, or they may not stay as long as they might in a critical care unit. But like if I have a group of 4 or 5 patients, maybe every one of them or 3 out of 4 of them will need an MRI or a CT scan. And as we know, these are very expensive. So that's something that gets factored in. The market. We also have to take a look at what's happening with the market. Is there inflation? Like around the hospital, if real estate expenses tend to go up. That's something that maybe the hospital would look at in terms of being able to retain their staff. Also, each floor has to look at its supplies. Are we going to need new equipment? Has anyone dropped a glucometer recently? Like, are we going to need to replace that? What about Band-Aids? Even something as small as Band-Aids need to be replaced, and that needs to be factored into the budget. Next, we might look at our staff. I think we all know that that's a huge part of a budget. We might look at how many RNs we need, how many PTCAs we need, or unit clerks or housekeepers, as we're all a part of the team. Also, we take a look at regulations and the law and how any changes might affect how much it costs to run our unit. Like if there have been changes in required weight ratios or lengths of stay for certain procedures, that's going to affect us. Next, the hospital, like the general setup of the hospital. If there are changes made to the facility, that might affect each floor in our budgets. Like right now, we have a general inpatient pharmacy. What if they were decide to decentralize that, and each floor were to need to maintain its own pharmacy? Then we would need to probably each floor would need to contribute to paying the pharmacist or tech to run that pharmacy. So these are all factors that are factored into a budget. And of course, that wouldn't take that long, right, to get that all sorted out. Of course, the process of writing a budget and getting it approved takes a very long time. I did not even realize, but it can take a quarter to half of a year every single year. It was nice. I got to talk to my manager for a bit today about doing this presentation, thinking about budgeting, and she was saying she loves doing the budget. She loves making it all work out. And part of the process that she enjoys is talking to her supervisors and on up the tree. I was mentioning, like in our floor on our break room door, we have a nursing hierarchy tree. So she likes to talk to everybody about what she's doing and innovations that she's making. And as she goes up, each branch kind of needs to sign off on it. And in a large facility such as ours, the board of directors or shareholders must also approve a budget. Of course, sometimes there are surprises, like even in a household budget, like when you have a plumbing issue and then your budget just has to go out the window. On our floor, we had an issue with, apparently we kept cutting the pulse ox probes off our vitals machines, and our manager kept having to replace them. So the last time that we replaced them, within a week or so, the hospital decided that we were going to move to disposable pulse ox machines, the little probes. And of course, our manager was heartbroken because that was money that we just had to eat in our budget and not use it, say, for pizza parties. At least there's only one budget model to follow, right? Of course not. There are at least a few that are pretty frequently used. The first, as we look again below, I'll come back up to the pictures then. We have cost centers, and this is what we use at LG. You know, in OBS, if we have to get a taxi voucher, we're asked for our cost center number. And these work like managers just estimate what the cost for our floor will be and document these costs throughout the year. In revenue centers, the goal is just to generate revenue, make a certain amount of money for a year. Then profit centers are somewhat similar. In this model, revenue is expected to exceed the cost. You're expected to bring in more money than is going out. And lastly, investment centers. In addition to balancing your costs and your revenue, you also, managers in charge of this sort of a budget model, also are managing a good bit of capital. So looking back up at these pictures, we can see like a cost center might be a human resource department, where a company needs it to survive, but a human resources department isn't exactly making money itself. Next, we can look at a profit center, where individual fast food restaurants might be a profit center for, say, the McDonald's administrative offices, where they're not actually taking in money at the administrative offices, but they're supported by each individual fast food restaurant in the chain, and they're expected to make money. Lastly, an investment center example might be like a theme park, where an incredible amount of capital, amount of money, goes into creating, say, Hershey Park. And it's expected to make money, but there's also a good bit of money or capital invested in creating that theme park itself. So do managers start from scratch every year? Fortunately, not so much in our sort of hospital system. But yes, the answer is yes and no. For example, many floors work with incremental budgets that are going to allow managers to improve upon, like make refinements to previous year's budget. On our floor, though, we're expanding. Maybe everybody knows this, that we're going to have a larger observation floor, and observation patients will primarily come to us instead of kind of spread throughout the hospital. So our managers had to use last year or previous years as models, but really need to kind of make some guesses because we're not really sure where things are going to go. So there's a bit of a guessing game there. And another option are zero-based budgets, which basically mean you start from scratch and you hope to get back to zero, meaning you don't want your outflow to be more than your income, because then you would be in the negative dollars, and of course no one wants that. So can budgets change once the year starts? And again, there are two models, so it's yes and no. In variable budgets, as I have written out kind of below this picture, in variable budgets, yes, there can be changes. In fixed budgets, no. So as I have up here on the graphic, you know, another way of saying this would be static and flexible budgets. So fixed would be static and flexible would be variable. So if you have a static budget, for example, if you are in long-term care and you have 10 beds, and for the majority of that year you have the same 10 people in those same 10 beds, maybe you could have a bit of a fixed or static budget. But for example, like in our floor, we tend to have people in and out, so that one bed, it would not be unusual to have 3 people in the bed in one day. Not at one time. So that, like, say, someone spends the night with us and then has an early discharge, and then maybe we fill the bed with someone who just needs to be observed for chest pain for a few hours, and then they're discharged to home. Then we might get yet one more person in that same bed for that night. So we need a flexible budget to deal with the costs of turning over a bed and the like, and initiating patient care. So down below here, there's a term called variance, and we're going to touch on that later in the presentation as well, which is the difference between what actually happened in the year and our budget plan for the year. And this can go in two directions. There's favorable and unfavorable. I'm sure we can all guess that in favorable differences or variances, the actual amount of money brought in is greater than the amount that we had anticipated. In unfavorable situations, the actual amount of money is a decreased amount of income, and that, of course, is unfavorable. But Fortunately, salary costs are just this, however much everyone makes an hour, right? And your manager just makes a list and add it all up, and it's easy as pie, right? Of course, a lot more goes into salary costs than just our hourly wage. As we know, we have a number of travelers on our floor right now, and anyone who's talked to them knows that their hourly wage is a good bit higher than ours is. But they do not have benefits, shift differentials, overtime, right? These things now, they have a set amount of hours that they make it, or that they work, and they do not get overtime hours then. On-call hours, now that would apply more to, say, the ED or the OR. And then on our floor, we also have premiums, like if nurses are able to become certified or they progress up the clinical ladder, then they will receive raises. So these are different things that managers need to factor into salary costs for a budget. But fortunately, salary costs aside, managers can hire anyone they need at any time, right? Of course, that's also not the case. We know, like, if there's been an efflux of people out to maybe people change jobs, go to different floors, or leave to go back to school or something to that effect, then managers cannot just immediately hire someone else. They have to go through a bit of a process. So there's the stress of a unit being somewhat understaffed. In addition to this, as our text says, can also reflect poorly on a manager. Managers can be seen as ineffective or not strong if they are not able to maintain a consistent staff. And supplementary staff, turnover, and absenteeism are all added expenses. And again, that can reflect poorly on a leader, which is an additional amount of stress for our nurse managers. So, what does being well-staffed mean, and to whom does it mean this? And I found this video that I thought was wonderful.
It's a constant struggle to be sure you have enough staff on your units to deliver safe patient care and stay on budget. Critical care nurses in particular aren't satisfied with staffing. Nationally, more than 40% don't think they have enough staff on their units. That's a little surprising since critical care units are usually staffed pretty consistently, with one nurse for every 2 patients. But staffing isn't just about the number of RNs on the unit. We surveyed more than 2,600 nurse managers and directors, including 300 leaders of critical care units. The 1-to-2 nurse-to-patient ratio was remarkably consistent. But what wasn't consistent was the number of support staff. The top quarter of surveyed units had at least 1 nursing assistant for every 5 RNs. But the bottom quarter had only 1 assistant for every 10 RNs, half the support. No wonder so many critical care nurses feel understaffed. With fewer support staff, nurses are stuck doing work that doesn't require an RN license, which leaves less time to focus on patient care that does require their specific skills. And that's not all. The educational preparation and experience of peer RNs on the unit also impacts how well a unit is staffed. And that's the power of our new 360-degree nurse staffing benchmarks. We share not just the nurse-to-patient ratio, but 5 other key staffing metrics for critical care units and 18 other unit types. Download the benchmarks now to see how your unit staffing stacks up against your peers.
I thought that was a wonderful video because it really shows us how, again, a manager can't just set out and say, all right, well, our unit clearly needs 20 RNs, and then her staffing work is done. No, she has to look into her budget and figure out what our floor will require to have a truly well-staffed floor. So I thought that was very interesting there. And then my next little slide here, I just thought we might all find this interesting. Some proposed RN ratios depending on the specialty of a floor. So as you can see, I just was looking at, especially I think most of us work in med-surg or some form of med-surg, and 1-to-4 is the proposed federal RN ratio, which I think sounds pretty good to most of us. Next, balancing the unit checkbook. How hard can it be? From my brief experience as an adult these past 25 years, I'll say balancing a checkbook much harder than you anticipate. So nursing units, of course, have the same sorts of issues, and they have not just one budget, but there's several subsets of budgeting. So the big umbrella is just an operating budget, and these are the anticipated expenses and revenues we've been talking about. This is also called the annual budget. But within that, there are several subsections. The revenue budget is what we would imagine the income to be from insurance payers and from our patients themselves, again, when they're self-pay. There's also the expense budget. That's divided into salary and non-salary. So these are small and large expenses from the entire floor. So it could be like equipment service projects, contracts, all the way down to, I had to use it as an example on our floor, our unit clerk, who is very, very fond of maintaining a certain count of dry erase markers. That's why I use this little gold pen picture, and is really upset and worried about our budget when we have to replace those. And the last little point here, I wanted to show the way there's tremendous pressure to get a budget and stick to it and have that help to keep facilities costs under control. This sort of pressure to control spending did lead Maryland to initiate like a global budget program for rural hospitals. They found, though, that use of these budgets ultimately did not reduce hospital use or price standardized spending as policymakers had anticipated. So there have been many different approaches, many different attempts to try to create a budget that will help a facility, as we said, to keep hospital use within limits and to reduce the price standardized spending, but not always the case. And so this is something certainly nurse managers and administrators continue to wrestle with. And of course, as we know, the budget is not the end of the story. You don't just write the budget and call it a day. As the budget is put into place, there's a term called variance that we had talked about earlier in our presentation that applies to any of the extras that happen as you're actually living through the year, any unforeseen circumstances. Managers are under tremendous pressure then to justify their variance and discuss it and make amends for it by investigating whether or not this is a variance that's expected to ever happen again. Is this a one-time unforeseen circumstance, or is it something that might happen again and again, and we need to be prepared for that? Salary is a frequent cause of variance. So within that, high volume, like high census, is going to require that we pay more people to take care of our patients, right? But this will also lead to higher revenue. So even though that's a cause of variance, maybe that would be an acceptable cause of variance. Efficiency can be a cause of variance, or rather a lack of efficiency, because now sometimes we end up with patients with higher acuity, and there's no way for a nurse to keep up with the same patient load because she needs to spend more time with each patient. Sometimes there's an issue of less nursing skills, much as we hate to think that. That's going to make people a little bit less efficient. Finally, low productivity. That's something I thought, say you're on your third or fourth 12 in a row, you're maybe not going to be as productive every minute of the day because you're exhausted, and that's something that's going to lead to a lack of efficiency. Lastly, rate. There, as we know, many different variances in rate. More seasoned staff I have here equal more expensive hourly rates, which we know. But as a trade-off, we have fewer nurses weeping in the med room. Not that any of us have ever done that. Anyway, the budget, though, as we know, only includes approved FTEs, right? Sadly, of course, no. There's a term called position control, and that's the term that we use when we're comparing what a unit's FTEs are and what they actually should be. So something that gets factored in is maternity leave. We've had a lot of this on our floor. We have some recent babies, and some babies are coming up. So these are changes where people are still officially like on our payroll, but they're on a leave. So we also still need those hours filled. So this becomes a never-ending puzzle for nurse managers. I also thought it was very interesting, which I found in an article written by Middle and Willis, that staffing stresses are among the leading causes of burnout in nurse managers, and I found that not at all surprising. So, as we've gone through all these terms, I think some of them are familiar to us just as floor nurses, and that is because LG is a magnet hospital. And in magnet hospitals, floor nurses tend to be involved in a lot of budget discussion and decision making. I know I've heard a lot of this in our huddles and just in little chats with our manager, and I think that's really a special part of working for a magnet hospital. So it's found that in these organizations, the dollar cost of programs for professional development can be quantified in actual cost savings. So this will lead to reduced turnover, increased retention in staff, and also improve patient outcomes. So there are real benefits to these programs. Lastly, in conclusion, I'll just say we have a wonderful opportunity to get involved in RLG, and that's shared governance. So we would strongly encourage anyone interested to get involved in shared governance. And thank you so much for listening. Last but not least, I have a page here with my references, and I really appreciate everyone's attention today. Thank you so much.